Tēnā koutou, everyone. I think purpose is a deeper connection with the contribution that we're working to make as an organisation, as an individual, with something larger and more embracing just the day in, day out kind of demands of work. And it's a kind of higher order understanding of what we're about and what we're trying to do. So maybe I can just give a backstory around this question, because it's a great question around purpose and what it means. So let me just kind of expand on that a bit. First off, I just want to welcome everybody and acknowledge the year, really. This has not been an ordinary year. And I think a lot of folks are pretty tired and pretty pushed. And I think particularly the teaching community, the educators, I'm sure you'll be looking forward to the close of term. So thank you for being here. And I'm just grateful to spend a little bit of time with you and to share a bit more about this question of what purpose is and how concepts like purpose and meaning can be helpful to us. Because I think that deeper sense of purpose, it's easy to be lost in the day-to-day demands of our work and all the stuff that kind of happens organisationally. We can lose touch with really that deeper core of what we're about and what we're hoping to do in our work. So kind of backstory, I don't know if you can see this, this strange looking model I put up here, but I've been working as I guess a strategic facilitator since about 1985, 86. After that first Labor government came in, there was a great rush of interest in kind of managerialist principles, and particularly around strategies and strategic intents and what they call big, hairy, audacious goals. So all of this sort of kit of corporate life kind of flourished in that sort of movement into the kind of new economics of the first Labor and then the national government that followed. So a lot of the strategic facilitation work I did was around where we're going, what sort of bold goals can we set for ourselves, and how we're going to do it strategically. And the big shift I've noticed in the last few years is this movement into a concern with purpose and the deeper contribution that an organisation is seeking to make, and alongside that with core values. So coming back to that first question, let's have a look at purpose in just a bit more detail. So purpose is organisationally, it's about the organisation's reason for being. The reason that it exists beyond just dollars or serving whatever the requirement that the community's put on it. And it defines a deeper sense of contribution, and particularly that sense of how our work together will make a difference in the community and how it will work at a human level to better people's lives. And that usually goes hand in hand with values. Now, the values that we honour and how we achieve the purpose. And we're not talking about bold statements like, I don't know, integrity or teamwork or whatever, but actually a deeper sense of values that kind of get embedded in the spirit of the organisation and get expressed in what people see, what they experience, and often are reinforced by the archetypes that are present in the organisation and by the rituals and stories and behaviours that demark how the organisation works day in, day out. So when you put the purpose and the values together, that becomes an expression of the why we exist, what we're collectively trying to achieve as an organisation and as a human community. And the why creates meaning. And meaning is pretty useful. It's pretty powerful. Let me just give you a quote here from these two characters in a recent Harvard Business Review paper. I'll just kind of read it out. When an authentic purpose permeates an organisation, the personal good and the collective good become one. Positive peer pressure kicks in and people are re-energised, and collaboration increases, learning accelerates and performance climbs, and people begin to find meaning in their work, and they grow rather than stagnate. And by tapping into that power, you can transform an organisation. And so there's quite a lot of recent research now that's really expressing the power and the effectiveness of a kind of compelling purpose. I think it's particularly important in complex organisational systems. When there's a real sense of collective purpose and collective values, it provides a kind of enabling holding pattern that can permeate an organisation and kind of hold the spirit of the contribution. And it paradoxically enables a lot more freedom and a lot more power, empowerment and freedom of action within the organization. So really, it's a really significant, useful, powerful thing to have. Unfortunately, it's in somewhat short supply. Just a recent book by Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall gives us this quote. And so what they're saying is that the prevailing assumption often in organizations is that we need goals, KPIs, systems to kind of hold the alignment, because our assumptions is that there's a deficit of action, of aligned action in our work experience. And I'll just keep reading the quote. Well, we're mistaken, they say. What we face instead is a deficit of meaning, of a clear and detailed understanding of the purpose of our work and the values we should honour in deciding how to get it done. People don't need to be told what to do. They want to be told why. The best organisations don't cascade goals or KPIs. The best organisations cascade meaning. So here we are, and the interesting thing for me in all the corporate work I've done is that now this notion of purpose and values and the concept of meaning that comes with that has become a central enabling opportunity, both for corporate and public sector NGO organisations. It turns out to hold much of the power of its future direction. So question is, first one, what's the contribution your organisation is seeking to make in the community, and what's its purpose? And thinking about, again, about your organisation, how might you assist your organisation to take its purpose from something that's just written on paper or maybe on the wall to something that's lived by everyone? Well, I just want to press on with this, and I want to draw some interesting parallels between the organisation's sense of why and our own personal sense of why. And the point I want to make is, actually, there's some very interesting parallels between an organisation's story around its values and purpose and the story of the individuals who are within the organisation. And the same principles really apply. Years ago, I wrote this book called The Spirit of Leadership. And I did a study of a number of people who were passionate about their work and seemed to be flourishing in their work. And what I found was that in that flourishing, they were people who had a profound sense of purpose and a desire to make a difference and a contribution, and at the same time, a difference that was deeply aligned with their own sense of values, what Thoreau would call the channel in which your life flows. And there was this sense of doing work that was good for me and good for the world at the same time. And in the literature, that's defined as a calling or a vocation. And what we find in a calling is it's distinctive from a job, which tends to be stuff we do for money with not a great deal of engagement, or a career, which we do because we've, I don't know, rolled out of school and we want to make our mark in the community. And we're very interested in progress and in acknowledgement and maybe accumulating a bit of influence and so on. But the calling is this place that Bruckner describes. It's the place in which your own deep gladness, this capacity to live out and express your values, to express things you're passionate about, and do that in the service of a community, what Bruckner describes as the deep hunger of the world. So where our own deep gladness and the world's hunger meet, that's the place of calling. And it turns out to have real power in terms of creating and sustaining a meaningful sense of engagement. And in the work I did, it just turned out to be tremendously good for individuals. I think I'll tell a story and then I'll come back to some of the academic research on this. I remember talking to a woman who was a single mum, but struggling portrait artist, and actually quite eminent in New Zealand in terms of being a portrait artist. And I remember interviewing her as part of the study for the book. And we were just chatting. I had my tape recorder there. And she talked about the moment in which she's painting, in which she could perceive the light coming out of the face of the person she was painting and just capture that in the image that she was putting onto the canvas. And I said, Sally, what's it like at that moment in which you capture light coming out of the face of the person you're painting? And she said, oh, I don't know. I don't know, I'm not sure. And then she said, it's awe. It's awe. How would it be to paint light? She said. How would it be to paint love? And then she cried for about 5 minutes as she really contemplated the power and the deep sense of connection and flourishing that flowed out of her work. So that was the power of calling. Now that's a kind of high bar, but it spoke to me of these moments in which we kind of emerge from the day-to-day demands of our work and in which moments of exhaustion can be coupled with moments of light and moments of spirit in which we reconnect with and feel back into the power and the significance of the work we're doing, and a sense of a kind of embodied connection with our own needs, and at the same time the sense that we're making a difference in some people's lives and that our work is worthwhile. So that sense of coming together creates meaning. And Martin Seligman is the guru of positive psychology. He asserts that meaning is the most venerable of all the happinesses. You can endure a lot if there's a sense of meaning in what we're about. So a couple of comments, I guess, from the academic literature. Meaning is really a good thing to have. And I won't go through this whole quote, but it's tremendously powerful at an individual level in that it promotes a sense of occupational identification, kinship, community, occupational importance, just all sorts of good things that feed into our organisational connection. And at the same time, it's associated with much greater life satisfaction, a sense of psychological well-being, positive effect, less psychological distress, negative effect, fewer anxiety, fewer depressive systems, lower risk of mortality. Some people conclude that a powerful sense of prevailing purpose, which goes, of course, beyond work, but that sense of making a contribution that's aligned with who we are at our core, that's good for 5 to 10 years additional longevity and aliveness in terms of longevity, not just lingering on. And 1 or 2 interesting qualitative studies, and we won't make too much of that, but even in terms of Alzheimer's, there's some interesting studies around what are called Alzheimer's escapees, people who have, when they've done autopsies, the clinical signs of the tangles and plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's, but when they've actually done significant cognitive testing with those people, in one case months before she died, no sign of that at all. And they found it was that sense of overarching purpose, that sense of connection with doing something that was meaningful in the community and that was deeply aligned with who I am at my core, that seemed to explain that phenomena. And it's good for organizations. And there's different parallels here in the literature, and I might just comment a bit on that. But here's Kim Cameron, who's from University of Michigan. The more that individuals define their work as a calling, the more meaningful the work, says Cameron. He's got good research on this. And it's interesting that people with a calling who have this combination of passion and personal connection, in some ways you'd think it could be a bit difficult when you've got everybody kind of passionately wanting to express themselves in their team. Turns out it's not. Turns out it's beneficial for team performance, and that multiple people with that sense of calling can really make a profound difference. And then Cameron goes on, high levels of meaningfulness in work, which is associated with this sense of calling, have been found to be associated with positive outcomes. And here he's writing in good North American parlance, extraordinary individual and organizational performance. So yeah, it's a powerful good organizationally. And I think as leaders in organizations, if we can create an organization context in which the why is preserved and in which people can bring their own sense of passion and their own sense of desire to make a difference and find that enlivened by their organization as opposed to dampened. One of the challenges we've got is a lot of our organizational technologies, and they've been taught by universities for decades, and there's some argument that a lot of our fundamental kind of leadership HR consciousness probably ran out of its use-by date, probably around 1958 or thereabouts. And we continue on with these approaches. And often, without meaning to, we can deaden people's sense of meaning and their commitment and their desire to do more. So I think it's often worth reflecting, is our organisation and the context we're creating, is it worthy of the highest efforts and contribution of people? Because it's a very, it's a real honour and a huge commitment to hold that sort of contribution that people are willing to bring to their organisational life. And so just being aware of that and considering the kind of spirit that we create in the school and this sense of bringing forth the deep sense of contribution that an organisation can make, I think is a really important piece of work. I worked years ago with a corporate organisation, and I remember interviewing one of the senior managers who was a real non-poetic rugby playing Kiwi bloke. And so much so that he got drunk at the leaving party of the chief executive and then tried to take a swing at the chief executive. So these are fairly basic relationship skills being deployed here. And but he felt the chief executive had betrayed the spirit of the organisation. So I asked him what went wrong, and he said, you know, we could have used their strategic input, but they didn't understand the spirit of the organisation. They didn't understand its soul. I thought that was an extraordinary statement from this man, and it spoke to the misalignment between his own deep commitment to the organisation, which was soulful and important for him, and how he felt the organisation had responded to that. So just a couple of questions to consider, and I'd like you just for us to reflect personally, and particularly as we consider how we're doing in this really difficult COVID period. Have you experienced a time in your life in which you felt a passionate sense of calling in your work? That sense of this work is right for me and right for the community at the same time. And what were the personal and organisational benefits of having that sense of meaning and calling? Well, can we have a chat about leadership approaches and how we can help sustain that energy in the people that we serve and the people that we're giving leadership to, and by implication ourselves. So can I just say what's not working? And I hope this doesn't offend anybody who's into some of these things, but this is quite recent research. So let's just say what's not effective. So what doesn't seem to work? Cascaded goals and KPIs just don't seem to work. And what tends to happen is that we have a set of goals. They're often imposed. They may be sort of imposed from the senior team right down through the whole organisation. And they're often out of currency by kind of February or so. They often get ignored. And then towards the end of the year, when maybe it's performance appraisal time or something, people come back in and there's a flurry of interest. But they really are a construct that's often just not helpful. Competency-based assessment is unhelpful. So this notion that people should, I don't know, be equally good at a whole variety of competencies, and that we should have a competency, maybe a 360 feedback, and then we invite people to be good on all of this stuff, including the stuff they're biogenetically unsuited to ever be good at, and we give them feedback about that, and often quite negative, and then we invite them to kind of go against the grain of their basic nature and humanity in a kind of complied session, you know, over a period of whatever. And so that doesn't work. Competency models are quite helpful in an overall frame for giving people a consciousness of a sort of leadership values or approaches we might aspire to. But as a sit-down assessment type approach, they are not helpful. No feedback is really unhelpful, and negative feedback is really unhelpful. But it turns out that negative feedback is much better than no feedback at all, particularly when it's done with a view to try and be constructive and try and kind of inform people's consciousness and understanding about how they might go along. And rating people's potential is unhelpful. Talent pools are unhelpful. High potential understandings are unhelpful. So they're unhelpful for a couple of reasons. One, we can't rate people with any degree of accuracy. Literature is quite clear that our ratings tend to be a projection of our own particular worldview or prejudice onto somebody. And really, there are times certainly when there's a specific behavioural issue that needs to be corrected. But this notion of rating somebody's overall, potential or capability, or even rating somebody on strategic thinking or team building or whatever, it just doesn't fire. So we want to set that aside if we can. And it's quite hard because the weight of several decades of management sort of approach will be behind that. But moving to what might help. Well, what can help is really connecting personally with the why and with the sense of meaning that kind of sits underneath the spirit of our teams and our schools, and actually being a living embodiment of that. Hence the need for our alignment with the deep why and deep purpose of our organisations becomes really important. And that can be hard when we're under pressure, maybe getting a bit burnt out, really feeling tired. So trying to regenerate that sense of personal connection is important. Secondly, encouraging spikiness and idiosyncrasy, and allowing some people to be pretty hopeless at some things, as long as they're not sort of dangerous or whatever, that it's a real difficulty. And then working with people in two ways: to notice what their strengths are and really pay attention to that and draw out those strengths and have conversations with them about how can we recraft your work. And Jane Dutton, whose image I've got there on the slide, how can I help you recraft the work so at least some of the time you're playing to your strengths and you're feeling the kind of developmental pull of kind of extending yourself in areas that you really find enjoyable, and that gives you a chance to kind of feel that sense of aliveness and growth in your work. And again, a little bit of literature on this. One study I heard says if people can be spending 20% of their job with time in a given week around their strengths, actually that's enough. Even if some of the other work is expressed as or felt as pretty mundane, just that sense of connection, at least some of the time, some of the day, with their strengths can be really profound. 3, paying a lot of positive attention and really working to foster positivity in the feedback and the experience that people have. And you're looking there for an average daily ratio of about 5 to 1 of positive to negative. And that's about the same as Gottman's research on a good marriage or long-term partnership relationship. You want a ratio of about 5 doses of positive feedback, positive affirmation, positive attention for every one time in which you may raise an issue, give difficult feedback, or whatever it might be. And positive feedback, I've mentioned that negative feedback is more effective than none at all. But positive feedback, positive attention is 30 times more effective than negative feedback, and it's 1,200 times more effective than no feedback at all. So this notion of really focusing on the positive, appreciative inquiry, really trying to bring people forward, and do so on the basis of the strengths that we kind of pay attention to, and attending to them and kind of drawing them forward, is a really powerful leadership opportunity. And then exploring with people, and the gold standard there, here's another book. This is Kim Cameron's book, Positive Leadership. He talks about a monthly sit-down conversation. Now, depending on how many people you're giving direct leadership to, this can vary. But what he calls a personal management interview. And in that interview, you have a conversation. And this, of course, requires the building up of trust and psychological safety, and you paying a really close attention. And it's a conversation about how you're going, that'd be the conversation in which you talk around strengths and work towards alignment. But also you might get a sense of a real deep sense of what people are passionate about. What are their values? And what's the kind of purpose that they might hope to kind of pursue in their work? And then just asking them, okay, how can I help you support this? How can we set up opportunities for you to grow? How can we keep the job in alignment with that sweet spot that I've got on that earlier table of that domain of calling that space in which people can experience some flow and a kind of vibrancy and aliveness of working in that space. So those sorts of conversations are very powerful and very profound. And so how about we put aside the bureaucracy of HR practice, and how about we just foster deep conversation based on a real concern for the spirit of the work we're trying to do and for the individual that we're giving leadership to, and seeing what we can draw out from them and how we can help them flourish and thrive in their work. When we do that, and here's Dan Cable, and he's kind of channeling Amy Wrzesniewski here, it's about helping people think proactively about purpose and simply to ask and help them to ask, why do I do my work? Who am I serving and what's the best way to serve them? And how can I add real value as opposed just to empty processing? And then to try and craft the work around their strengths and coaching and enabling people around that type of crafting. The really exciting thing is that it opens up the agility box, says Dan Cable, because it allows people to think on their own terms. And you want people to be effective on their own terms. And you may have somebody super messy who's effective, and somebody who's super organized and super effective, and somebody who's super extrovert and super effective, and somebody who's actually quite contained and introverted who's super effective. And so allowing people to play to their spikiness, to their difference, and allowing them to express themselves in the way that their own individuality and their own story comes forward into a vibrant contribution in the organization. And for people to ask, what's the problem I'm trying to solve for the organization? What's the best way that I can use my strengths and my interest and my background to solve that problem and actually create value for somebody? So it's opening up the sense of possibility in a system. And sadly, a lot of our well-established leadership HR practices, they close things down and they provide a kind of bureaucratic clutter that both exhausts people and makes it difficult for them to stay in touch with the spirit of the work. So how might we work as leaders, given some of the stuff we've been chatting about, to connect or reconnect our teams with a real sense of meaning and calling in their work? Okay, let's just finish with a final slide. This is Dan Cable. COVID, he said, is giving us a new way of working. The leader's job is to help set the direction that people buy into and to help people understand the customer, e.g. our students, teachers, whānau, etc., and how it looks when we serve them well. And then take the hands off the control button. The idea, which, and even some of us, even if we're not aware of it, the whole command control consciousness is alive and well, often even with the best will in the world. So to take the hands off the control button, that we know best, we know the way to do that, we know what KPIs you'll have to hit so that we'll know that when you've done the right behavior. The leader wants to be relevant over the next 5 years, and if they want to be allowed to serve as a leader, this is absolutely essential. And there are wonderful opportunities ahead for these kind of leaders, and a rather diminishing pool of possibilities for those that prefer a different style. Just in line with that, I also think the sort of leadership that we're talking about just requires an incredible level of self-compassion and self-care and a deep sense of looking after ourselves and lots of opportunities to return to who we are and what we need at our core. And often actually paradoxical way of doing that is doing stuff outside of work. That's just extremely difficult. I find gardening or tramping or mountain biking can be a real powerful way for returning me to the kind of core of the sense of contribution I want to make in my work. So looking after ourselves, being kind to ourselves, being compassionate to ourselves, and that whole sense of that poem that talks about begins, the time will come when you'll greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit, give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the one who has loved you all of your life, whom you ignored for another. Take down the love letters from the mirror, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, sit, feast on your life. That's Derek Walcott, and that's a powerful prescription. it's really hard to work with an organisation spirit and with a sense of calling if we're just worn out. And so the whole notion of self-kindness and self-care, absolutely fundamental. So kia ora, everybody. Thank you.